The world of ancient Egypt is remembered through monuments of stone, through tombs painted with gods and kings, and through stories of wealth beside the Nile. Yet behind these images stood children, small bodies, living in heat, dust, and hunger. Their lives were not marked by luxury, but by labor, disease, and discipline. They wore linen that never stayed clean, ate bread filled with grit, and worked before they learned to play. Many never survived beyond their earliest years, and those who did carried scars of illness and hardship. Religion surrounded them, offering charms and prayers. Yet no amulet could guard every child from loss. Tonight we move slowly through their world-quiet homes of mud brick. The smell of the river, the sound of songs whispered at night, settle into stillness. Close your eyes to the desert sun, and join us in the fragile days of Egypt's children, born into the Nile's dust. The first cries of a child in ancient Egypt rose not in comfort, but in heat and dust. Most children were born in simple mud brick homes, built along the banks of the Nile, or in crowded villages where families worked the land. Life began in the shadow of labor, for Egypt's children entered a world where survival was not guaranteed. Birth was overseen by women, often midwives from the community. No physicians stood by. No written record of medicine attended. Charms were placed near the mother, amulets shaped like Bes, the dwarf god, or Taret, the hippopotamus goddess, believed to guard women in labor. Incantations were whispered to keep away, spirits thought, to cause stillbirth. Yet these protections could not prevent the dangers of childbirth. Many mothers died, and many infants did not survive the first days. For those who lived, the Nile shaped their existence. Its floods brought fertile soil, but also swarms of insects, stagnant water, and disease. Mosquitoes spread fevers. Parasites hid in the river's edges, entering through bare feet. Children grew quickly, but with frailty. Malnutrition, fevers, and infections shadowed their earliest years. Children wore little in their youth. In the heat of Egypt, boys and girls ran naked until adolescence. Their shaved heads reduced lice, with a single lock of hair left dangling on the side, called the side lock of youth. This marked them as children, visible in countless painted tombs and carved reliefs. The lock remained until puberty, when the child was deemed grown. Games filled their hours, but even these were shaped by the harshness of life. Clay balls, carved dolls, and wooden animals have been found in tombs. Children played with spinning tops or threw knuckle bones made from sheep or goat joints. Yet work began early. Boys helped in fields, scattering seed or carrying water. Girls learned weaving, grinding grain, and tending siblings. Childhood was short, less a stage of life than a passage into duty. Food reflected class. Children of farmers ate bread made from barley or emmer wheat, coarse and filled with grit from stone grinding. The bread wore down teeth, leaving them jagged and decayed even in youth. Onions, garlic, and lentils were common. Meat was rare, reserved for festivals. The wealthy ate beef, geese, and fish. Their children nourished better, but still not spared from disease. Even in royal households, child mortality was high. Archaeologists studying mummies have found evidence of malnutrition, parasites, and chronic illness among children of all ranks. Discipline was strict. Ancient Egyptian texts, preserved on papyrus, speak of children as needing correction. A proverb from the Instructions of Ani reads, "A boy's ears are on his back. He hears when he is beaten." The rod was a tool of teaching as well as punishment. Fathers taught sons obedience. Mothers instructed daughters in labor and household duty. Education was rare, limited mostly to boys of scribal or noble families. For those chosen to learn, school was demanding. Boys trained to become scribes began study at early ages, copying hieroglyphs onto shards of pottery or scraps of limestone. Hours were long, discipline harsh. Teachers carried sticks, and laziness was punished with beatings. The reward was literacy, a skill that offered entry into temples, government, and records. Yet only a small number reached this path. Most remained bound to labor in fields, workshops, or households. The Nile itself was both play and danger. Children swam in its waters, splashing in its shallows. Reliefs show young boys herding cattle across streams, their small bodies clinging to horns for support. But the river carried risk. Crocodiles lurked, silent beneath the surface. Hippopotamuses defended their territory with violence. Drowning was common, and the river's unseen diseases claimed many young lives. Religion touched every child's life. Amulets were hung around their necks, scarabs or images of gods thought to bring protection. Children recited prayers, followed festivals, and watched as priests carried statues of gods through city streets. Death was explained not as an ending, but as a journey into another world. Still, parents mourned their lost children deeply. Small coffins have been found, shaped carefully, filled with toys and amulets, placed gently in the earth. The world of a child in ancient Egypt was fragile. Survival depended on luck, family, and the rhythms of the Nile. From the moment of birth, life pressed forward without pause, demanding strength from the smallest of bodies. Childhood was not free from labor, hunger, or fear. It was the beginning of endurance, a preparation for lives that were always short and uncertain. Bread, onions, and hunger. The Nile provided food, but never enough to free children from hunger. From the moment they could chew, Egyptian children ate the same diet as adults: coarse bread, onions, beans, and, when fortune allowed, fish or meat. Food was survival, but it was also burden. It carried grit, disease, and imbalance that shaped the bodies of the young. Bread was the foundation. It was made from emmer wheat or barley, ground into flour on stone querns. Mothers knelt for hours, dragging one stone across another, grinding grain into meal. Sand and grit mixed with the flour, invisible but constant. Baked into loaves, it wore down teeth with every bite. Children's teeth, examined in mummies, show enamel ground flat, cavities deep, and abscesses spreading even in youth. Pain in the mouth was a companion to every meal. Onions and garlic filled bellies when bread alone could not. They were cheap, easy to grow, and available in nearly every village. Workers carried them in baskets, priests offered them to the gods, and children ate them daily. These foods gave strength, but also odor that clung to bodies and breath. Lentils and beans added variety, though they often caused stomach pains. Vegetables filled most diets, with little sweetness beyond dates or honey reserved for rare occasions. Meat was scarce. Farmers kept cattle, goats, and geese, but these were too valuable to eat often. Chickens were unknown in early periods, only arriving much later. Most children grew up without tasting beef or lamb except during festivals. Instead, fish from the Nile provided protein. Nets dragged from boats brought tilapia and perch. Children helped clean and salt them, though the river's fish carried parasites. Worms entered through undercooked flesh, spreading illness that lingered for years. Wealth changed the table. Children of nobles ate roasted geese, beef stews, and honey cakes sweetened with figs. Tomb paintings show banquet scenes, children seated beside parents, reaching for grapes and bread. Yet even these children were not free from hunger or sickness. Studies of royal mummies, like those of young princes, reveal evidence of malnutrition and bone disease. The abundance of the wealthy did not erase the hazards of the Nile. Water was as dangerous as it was necessary. The Nile, source of all life, also carried unseen threats. Children drank from jars filled at its banks. The water was thick with silt, insects, and parasites. Schistosomiasis, a disease spread through the river, left traces in the bodies of mummified children, swollen organs, damaged bladders, and weakness that haunted them throughout short lives. Beer, brewed from barley, became safer than water, and even children drank it daily. It was weak, cloudy, and sour, but it was nourishment. Festivals provided brief relief from monotony. During celebrations of the gods, food was abundant. Offerings placed before statues were shared among priests, and sometimes the people. Roast meats, sweetbreads, and jars of beer appeared in villages. For children, these moments were rare feasts. They ate until full, then returned to days of bread, onions, and beans. Malnutrition shaped childhood. Bones grew thin, spines curved, and skulls sometimes showed signs of anemia. Many children died young, their growth stunted, their bodies weakened. Tombs of the poor rarely held offerings, only simple burials with a few clay pots, suggesting lives ended before strength could be found. The act of eating was also a task. Children carried baskets of grain, ground flour with mothers, fanned fires for baking, and fetched water from the Nile. They learned early that food was not given freely, but made through constant labor. Hunger drove discipline as much as punishment did. Disease from food was common. stomach worms, spread through raw vegetables or fish, left children thin and weak. Dysentery followed meals tainted by dirty water. Even the wealthy could not escape this. In tomb texts, prayers for health often mention stomach ailments, suggesting constant discomfort. For children, food meant survival without joy. Bread was hard, vegetables bitter, fish risky, and meat rare. Hunger was never far. They ate to endure, not to enjoy. Their meals were shaped by the river's gifts and curses, steady but never safe. Work before play. Childhood in ancient Egypt was short. From the moment children could walk, they were given tasks. Play existed, but duty filled their days. Work shaped their bodies, their routines, and their sense of belonging. For most, the fields and the household became their world. Boys of farming families followed their fathers into the fields. They learned to scatter seed across furrows opened by wooden plows. Oxen pulled the plows, their slow steps matched by the careful motions of small hands throwing grain. Boys fetched water from canals, dug from the Nile, carrying jars that weighed nearly as much as themselves. In flood season, when water spread across the land, boys stood waist-deep, pulling weeds or guarding crops from birds. The sun pressed heavily on bare backs, and insects swarmed without end. Girls worked within the household. They sat beside their mothers at grinding stones, pushing heavy slabs of stone back and forth, turning grain into flour. Their hands blistered, their arms ached, and dust coated their faces. They helped weave linen on simple looms, their fingers learning the slow rhythm of thread. They carried smaller children on their hips, watched fires, and fetched water. Tasks began small but grew heavier as they aged. Children of craftsmen learned trades early. Sons of potters shaped clay, smoothing wet earth into jars. Daughters of weavers twisted flax into fibers. In families of builders, children carried stones, mixed mud, or plastered walls. Tools were simple wooden mallets, chisels, baskets, and children grew into them as though they were extensions of their bodies. Apprenticeship began not with choice but with birth. In wealthier families, work was different, but still demanding. Sons of scribes were sent to schools, attached to temples or offices. They sat for hours, copying hieroglyphs onto shards of pottery. Teachers watched with rods in hand, striking for mistakes. These boys worked with ink and reed pens rather than plows, yet the pressure was the same. Girls of wealthy households managed servants, learning to supervise weaving, spinning, and cooking. Their work was lighter in body but heavy in expectation. Reliefs and texts reveal little distinction between play and labor. Scenes show boys herding animals, running alongside cattle, guiding donkeys, or holding ropes tied to geese. Girls are shown grinding grain or baking bread, their duties blended into the rhythm of daily life. What leisure they found came only in stolen hours. Festivals gave temporary relief. Children helped prepare feasts, carrying food, lighting fires, and serving elders. Yet even in celebration, they were workers first. Music and games filled evenings, but when morning returned, so did labor. The Nile itself offered another form of work. Boys fished with nets, waded into shallows, and trapped birds in reed enclosures. Girls gathered reeds and lotus plants, carrying them to weave mats and baskets. Children were always near the river, its risks accepted. Drowning, crocodiles, and fevers did not lessen the constant pull of duty. Texts from ancient Egypt emphasized discipline. The instruction of Katie, written for young scribes, says, "The ear of a boy is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." Work and correction were tied together. Idleness was condemned. Fathers demanded effort, mothers enforced it, and teachers delivered blows for mistakes. Child workers left physical traces. Skeletons of young Egyptians show curved spines, worn joints, and muscles shaped by heavy tasks. Grinding grain left grooves in bones from repetitive motion. Carrying water bent shoulders forward. Even in death, the bodies of children revealed the weight of their labor. For most, there was no escape. Work bound childhood from beginning to end. The Nile's rhythm of planting, harvest, and flood marked their tasks. Whether carrying jars, grinding grain, weaving linen, or copying texts, children lived in labor. Their hands bore calluses, their skin bore sun, and their backs carried strain. Play, when it appeared, was brief, always interrupted by the call of duty. Play among dust and stone. Even in a world of labor, Egyptian children found moments of play. Their toys and games were simple, made from clay, wood, or scraps left from household work. Play did not remove the hardships of life, but it gave children brief escapes. Archaeologists have uncovered these objects in tombs and ruins, silent fragments of childhood preserved in dust. Clay dolls were among the oldest toys. Shaped by hand, they carried painted eyes and small wigs of string or beads. Some had movable limbs, joined with cord. Others were simple, little more than rough shapes pressed from Nile clay. Wooden dolls were carved more carefully, sometimes decorated with real hair. These figures were often buried with children, placed beside them as companions for the afterlife. Animal toys appeared as well. Clay cats, wooden crocodiles, and ivory hippos have been found. Some carried wheels, pulled by strings across packed dirt floors. Others were carved as figures to hold in hand. These animals reflected the world around children, the creatures of the Nile, the fields, and the desert edges. Balls were common. Made from leather, cloth, or papyrus reeds bound tightly, they were tossed in open spaces or kicked between children. Groups played throwing games, passing balls in circles or trying to keep them from touching the ground. Reliefs show girls in rows, tossing balls high into the air. These scenes suggest both leisure and discipline, for the games may have trained coordination as much as they amused. Knucklebones were another form of play. Made from sheep or goat joints, they were thrown and caught in games much like dice. Children tossed them into the air, catching them on the backs of their hands. Sometimes they were carved into small figures or painted. Adults used them for divination, but children played with them as toys. Spinning tops, made from wood, spun across stone floors. Simple sticks or string set them in motion. The hum of a spinning top carried softly through courtyards. Games of balance and patience filled hours when work did not demand attention. Board games also reached children. Senet, the most famous, was played on wooden boards marked with squares. Small pieces were moved according to throws of sticks or knucklebones. The game carried religious meaning, symbolizing the passage through the afterlife. Yet children played it as well, learning its moves at home. Cheaper versions were scratched onto stone or wood, their boards drawn crudely but used often. Play extended beyond objects. Children wrestled in sand, raced in fields, and swam in the Nile's shallows. Reliefs show boys balancing on papyrus stalks, pushing one another into the water. Games of strength and agility filled their time, shaping bodies for the labor and duties that awaited them. Girls danced, imitating ritual movements they saw in festivals. They clapped hands in rhythm, sang simple songs, and moved in circles under the Sunday. Yet play was fragile. Work interrupted it constantly. A child tossing a ball might be called to fetch water. A girl playing with a doll might be sent to grind grain. Games ended with the voice of a parent or the call of duty. Toys were left behind, forgotten until dusk. Toys also carried symbolic weight. Dolls placed in tombs were not only playthings but protectors. Some were carved with exaggerated features, thought to ward off spirits. Clay animals buried with children may have symbolized companions in the afterlife. What survives of their play blurs the line between amusement and belief. The quality of toys reflected class. Children of the wealthy owned painted dolls, ivory animals, and polished game boards. Poor children shaped toys from mud, sticks, and scraps. Yet across classes, the impulse to play was the same. The act of shaping a ball, spinning a top, or balancing on a reed was universal. Play did not erase hardship. Hunger still lingered, disease still spread, and work always returned. But in these brief moments, children found small escapes. A spinning top, a painted doll, or the splash of water in the Nile gave them fragments of joy. These fragments, fragile and temporary, marked their childhood as much as labor did. The school of scribes. Education in ancient Egypt was not for every child. Most never saw the inside of a school. They worked in fields, workshops, and homes. Their skills learned through repetition. But for a small group of boys, usually sons of scribes, priests, or officials, school meant long hours with reed pens, harsh discipline, and little rest. The path of the scribe offered a future of status, but it began with years of quiet labor under strict watch. Classes were held in small rooms, attached to temples or government offices. Children sat on mats or low benches, with shards of limestone or broken pottery before them. These scraps, called ostraca, served as their practice boards. Papyrus was valuable and not wasted on learners. The air was filled with the sound of scratching reeds, the mutter of boys repeating lines, and the stern voice of a teacher guiding and correcting. The reed pen was their tool. Cut to a sharp point, it was dipped in black or red ink made from soot and ochre. Ink was stored in small pallets carved with depressions for mixing. Children practiced writing hieratic, a simplified script, before attempting full hieroglyphs. They copied proverbs, prayers, and lists. Mistakes were circled, and corrections demanded repetition. Discipline was constant. Teachers carried sticks and did not hesitate to use them. Texts from the period speak openly of beatings as a form of teaching. A passage from the Instruction of Kedi reads, "The boy's ears are on his back. He listens when he is beaten." Learning was tied to pain, obedience to fear. Boys sat for hours, their hands cramped, their backs sore from both posture and strikes. Memorization was central. Students recited lines aloud, their voices droning together in monotone. Proverbs such as, "Do not speak falsely. It is an abomination to the gods," were repeated until they became second nature. Arithmetic was taught through copying problems, learning multiplication and division by rote. The rhythm of learning was unchanging, slow, and heavy. Teachers were often scribes themselves, men who managed records in temples or government halls. They carried authority not through kindness, but through knowledge and punishment. Their task was to produce new scribes, skilled in writing contracts, measuring grain, and recording taxes. The work was demanding, but it promised a life removed from farming or hard labor. Boys who succeeded moved from ostraca to papyrus, from copying lines to composing their own. They learned how to draft letters, keep accounts, and record prayers. Religious training was part of this path, for writing was tied to temples. Students copied hymns and sacred texts, their hands repeating what priests chanted in ceremonies. School days were long. Lessons began at sunrise and lasted until dusk, broken only by simple meals of bread and onions. Play was rare. Rest was short. When not writing, students swept floors, prepared ink, or fetched water. Even outside lessons, boys often studied, repeating words by lamplight. Girls rarely entered these schools. Education for them was informal, learned through mothers and household tasks. Only in rare cases, within wealthy or priestly families, might a girl be taught to read. For most, literacy remained closed. Childhood education was a privilege limited by both class and gender. Despite the harshness, becoming a scribe offered reward. Inscriptions describe scribes as free from manual labor. One text, the Satire of the Trades, compares the scribe to other workers, saying, "There is no job free from bosses, except the scribes. He commands, while others toil." This promise drew boys into long years of study, even as their youth slipped quietly away. The remains of this education survive. Ostraca, bearing the clumsy hieratic of young hands, have been found, with mistakes corrected by sharper strokes. Some carry simple drawings, scribbles of animals, or stick figures made by boys bored with copying lines. These fragments show the humanity of students who lived thousands of years ago, their frustration and fatigue preserved in stone. The school of scribes was not a place of laughter or freedom. It was silence, repetition, and the sting of correction. For those who endured, the reward was survival in a world where most labored in sun and soil. For children, however, the price was their years of play, given over to endless copying beneath the watch of stern hands. Illness in the shadow of the Nile. Children in ancient Egypt lived with sickness from the moment they were born. The Nile, giver of life, also carried disease. Insects bred along its banks. Water swelled with parasites, and food carried grit that wore away teeth. Few children reached adulthood without scars of illness. Many never reached adulthood at all. The most common disease was intestinal. Worms entered through food or water, living inside the body for years. Stomach pain, diarrhea, and weakness followed. Mummies of children show swollen bellies and damaged organs, signs of parasites that shaped daily life. Schistosomiasis, spread by tiny worms in the Nile's waters, caused fevers, bloody urine, and weakness. Children who bathed or swam in the river often carried the disease. Fevers spread easily. Mosquitoes carried malaria, especially in the delta. Its symptoms, shivering, sweating, and exhaustion, are recorded in texts that describe heat that burns, then cold that shakes the bones. Flies spread eye diseases, that left many children partially blind. Reliefs show boys and girls with kohl painted thickly around their eyes. While the black paint may have been decorative, it also served as protection against infection and sunlight. Nutrition itself carried harm. Bread ground with stone dust wore down teeth. Cavities and abscesses spread, even in children. Examination of mummies reveals infections that reached into the jaw, sometimes fatal. Gum disease caused tooth loss long before adulthood. Meals sustained the body but carried hidden damage with every bite. Injuries added to illness. Bare feet on stone, wood, and mud left cuts and sores that became infected. Bones broken in play or work often healed poorly. Children who herded animals or worked in fields faced injuries from horns, tools, or falls. Without advanced treatment, these wounds lingered, crippling for life. Medicine existed, though limited. Physicians treated illness with mixtures of herbs, honey, and animal fats. Honey was applied to wounds, its antibacterial properties unknowingly useful. Garlic and onions were given for strength, dates for stomach problems, and castor oil as a laxative. Magical spells were written on papyrus, recited over the sick. Amulets shaped like scarabs or gods were tied to the body. These combined belief and treatment, blending ritual with practical care. Children were often given amulets shaped like the god Bes or the goddess Taret. These were thought to guard against evil spirits, believed to cause fevers and seizures. Mothers placed these charms near beds, their presence a form of medicine. Yet disease still spread, and death still followed. Some ailments were recorded by scribes. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, describes treatments for worms, coughs, burns, and broken bones. It lists hundreds of remedies, some based on plants, others on ritual. Few children would have received the more elaborate cures. For the poor, illness meant endurance rather than treatment. Death among children was common. Tombs of the young have been uncovered, small coffins placed carefully beside those of parents. Some held toys, dolls, or amulets, offerings for the afterlife. Others contained only bones wrapped in linen, buried with little ceremony. Archaeologists estimate that many children did not survive beyond the age of 5. For families, grief was a familiar weight. The wealthy could sometimes provide more care. Royal children were attended by physicians, yet they too suffered. Studies of mummified princes and princesses reveal evidence of scoliosis, malaria, and dental disease. Even in palaces, illness remained constant. No rank shielded children from the hazards of the Nile. Life expectancy was short. Most Egyptians lived fewer than 40 years. For children, the odds were harshest. Sickness, hunger, accidents, and disease claimed them in large numbers. Families bore many children knowing most would not survive. Reliefs show parents holding infants tenderly, but also reveal the fragility of their lives. Religion explained illness as the work of spirits or gods. Priests performed rituals to drive sickness away. Sacred water was sprinkled, prayers recited, and incense burned. Families trusted in these rites, hoping the unseen could protect where herbs failed. Children grew up surrounded by charms, chants, and small rituals meant to guard their fragile health. The traces remain in bones and texts. Swollen skulls reveal anemia. Curved spines show malnutrition. Teeth worn flat reflect bread filled with grit. Parasites leave their marks in organs preserved by desert sands. Every child carried the weight of illness, either visible in life or buried with them in death. The rod and the lesson. Childhood in ancient Egypt was shaped not only by work and hunger, but also by discipline. Fathers, mothers, and teachers alike believed that correction through punishment was necessary. Instruction and pain were tied together, a pattern repeated in homes, fields, and schools. Texts from the period record these views openly. The instruction of Kedi, copied by scribal students, tells the boy, "The ear of a youth is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." This phrase appears again and again in writings, showing how discipline was seen not as cruelty, but as the only path to obedience. Children were thought to learn best through correction of the body. At home, fathers were the primary enforcers. Sons who failed to obey in labor or respect elders were struck. Mothers also corrected, though often through words or lighter blows. Girls were taught early to obey quietly, their tasks tied to household order. Boys, more often outdoors, faced stricter control, especially when laziness in fields risked the family's survival. Teachers were harsher still. In scribal schools, discipline was constant. Students sat with reed pens, repeating lines onto pottery shards. A mistake brought swift punishment. Teachers carried rods, striking hands, backs, or legs. The satire of the trades described schooling as filled with the rod, the beating, the task repeated. Students endured because the reward of literacy outweighed the pain. Their backs bore marks that became part of memory. Punishments were not always physical. Extra tasks were assigned, copying lines until hands cramped, carrying water, or sweeping floors. These added burdens served as reminders, yet beatings remained most common. A daily reality for children under teachers and fathers alike. Discipline also appeared in religion. Stories of gods punishing disobedience were told to children as warnings. Myths of Horus and Seth, of Ra, striking down those who defied him, framed divine authority as an extension of human authority. Children grew up seeing correction not only as family order, but as cosmic law. The household itself enforced obedience. Older siblings watched younger ones, correcting them when parents were absent. Children learned early that misbehavior brought swift response. The rhythm of correction shaped their sense of belonging, teaching them that survival depended on order. Archaeological traces of punishment are indirect. Ostraca show repeated lines copied by students, evidence of correction. Written exercises contain phrases such as, "I will not talk back to my teacher," or "I will not be lazy." These fragments reveal discipline in written form. The echo of punishments long past. Corporal punishment was accepted without question. It was not seen as cruelty but necessity. The Nile's cycle demanded order. Crops, herds, and homes relied on discipline. Children were molded to fit this rhythm, their bodies and minds pressed into obedience. Yet affection was not absent. Scenes in tombs show parents holding children tenderly, children clutching hands or playing at their feet. Care and correction coexisted. Love was not separated from discipline but expressed through it. To correct was to prepare. To prepare was to protect. The wealthy were not spared from discipline. Sons of scribes, priests, and nobles faced the rod in schools as much as common children did at home. Daughters of households were scolded for failing to weave properly, for speaking too loudly, for neglecting duties. Authority crossed class, its presence the same in mud brick homes and palace walls. Punishment also reflected belief in balance, Mot. Disorder was dangerous, threatening the harmony of life. Correction, even painful, was seen as restoring balance. A disobedient child was not only a family burden, but a disruption of harmony itself. For children, discipline was constant. From the first tasks of carrying water to the copying of texts, they knew the sting of rods, the weight of added chores, and the sharp words of elders. Their childhood was shaped not only by hunger, work, and sickness, but by correction repeated until obedience was second nature. Small graves by the Nile. Death touched childhood, often in ancient Egypt. Illness, hunger, and accidents claimed lives quickly, and many families buried children before they reached maturity. Archaeological remains, fragile bones wrapped in linen, reveal how common early death was. The small size of coffins, the toys placed inside them, and the quiet graves near villages speak of a world where loss was ordinary. Infant mortality was especially high. Many children did not survive the first year. Tombs of the poor rarely contained more than a small body wrapped in cloth and placed in the earth. Wealthier families provided wooden coffins, painted with protective spells. Some coffins were shaped like human figures, even for children, showing their passage into the afterlife was treated with care. Amulets were laid beside them, scarabs, figures of Bez, or the Eye of Horus symbols meant to guard the child in death as in life. For older children, burials included traces of play. Archaeologists have found dolls, balls, and carved animals placed within graves. These toys were thought to accompany the child into the afterlife, providing comfort. Some burials held small vessels of food or jars of beer, the same offerings given to adults. The belief was that the soul, even of a child, required nourishment in its journey. Tombs of the wealthy carried greater decoration. Scenes painted on walls sometimes showed children playing, swimming, or tending animals. These images, frozen in pigment, reflect the desire of parents to preserve joy in eternity. Coffins inscribed with prayers and spells from the Book of the Dead guided the young spirit through the trials of the afterlife. Rituals performed by priests included recitations and libations, just as for adults. The poor had simpler means. Many children were buried in shallow pits, their bodies wrapped in reed mats or laid in clay jars. These jar burials were common for infants and small children. The jars, once used for grain or water, became vessels of death. They were placed in courtyards, near houses, or at the edges of fields. Families lived and worked beside these graves. Reminders of loss within daily life. Mothers mourned deeply. Lullabies and prayers carved into ostraca reveal grief and longing. One fragment reads, "May you sleep well, little one. May the gods hold you, for my arms cannot." Such words, though rare, show the sorrow carried silently by parents. Death was common, but grief was not absent. Religion explained death as transition. Children were believed to enter the same afterlife as adults, guided by Osiris and protected by Isis. Their innocence was thought to help them, unburdened by sins or offenses. Still, rituals of protection were performed. Priests chanted over small coffins, incense was burned, and offerings placed. Even the youngest were given ritual care, for every soul was part of the cosmic order. Excavations reveal cemeteries filled with children. In the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, near Thebes, graves of infants and children were found beside those of parents. At Giza, cemeteries show rows of small burials, their contents humble simple beads, shells, or scraps of cloth. These graves remind us how fragile life was, even in a civilization that built monuments meant to last forever. Some children of royal blood left mummies that survive today. The tomb of Tutankhamun contained 2 small mummified infants, believed to be his daughters. Their coffins were crafted with care, gilded and inscribed, though their lives were brief. These remains show that even kings faced the same grief as farmers. Wealth altered burial, but not the loss itself. Death shaped how families viewed life. With high mortality, parents had many children, hoping some would survive. Yet every loss left a mark. Amulets, prayers, and offerings reflected both fear and hope. The presence of toys in graves shows that parents wished to preserve fragments of joy even when life was short. The Nile's soil has preserved these burials for millennia. Small bones wrapped in linen, jars filled with dust, and amulets worn smooth by touch remain as records. They reveal how deeply death marked childhood in ancient Egypt, how families sought to protect, to mourn, and to remember. Children within the household. The household was the center of a child's life in ancient Egypt. Homes were made of mud brick, their walls coated with plaster, their roofs flat, their rooms simple. Within these spaces, children learned work, discipline, belief, and affection. Family life was steady, shaped by the Nile's cycles and the needs of survival. Fathers carried authority. They directed labor in fields, workshops, and households. Sons were expected to follow their example, learning farming, building, or trade. Texts preserved on papyrus speak often of the father's role as teacher. The instruction of any advises, "Give your son instruction, teach him to be a scribe, for he will be honored more than the man of the hoe." Fathers corrected harshly, but they also guided. Their presence shaped a boy's sense of duty and place. Mothers carried care. They bore the weight of childbirth, nursing, feeding, and raising children. Scenes painted on tomb walls show mothers holding infants, rocking them, or offering food. Women ground grain, baked bread, wove cloth, and tended younger children. Daughters remained close to them, learning skills of weaving, cooking, and household management. The bond between mother and child was visible in daily labor. Siblings played and worked together. Older children cared for younger ones, carrying them on hips or backs. Reliefs show children walking in groups, some holding the hands of smaller brothers or sisters. Sibling bonds provided comfort and help, though quarrels also arose. With many children in each family, relationships were layered with both closeness and rivalry. Affection appeared in gestures. Children are depicted clutching their parents' hands, sitting at their feet, or leaning against them. Parents buried children with care, placing toys or amulets beside them. Though discipline was harsh, love was present. The two were not opposed but joined, for correction was seen as a form of guidance. Education in the household began early. Children learned by watching. Boys imitated fathers, copying movements of farming or tool-making. Girls mirrored mothers, practicing grinding or weaving with miniature tools. Songs, proverbs, and stories taught lessons. Oral instruction passed values, shaping children into members of society. Meals brought families together. Bread, onions, beans, and beer formed the common fare. Families gathered around clay bowls, eating with hands or wooden spoons. Children sat beside parents, learning to eat from what little was available. In wealthier homes, meals were larger, with meats, figs, and honey. But the act of sharing remained constant. Festivals brought households into wider community. Families carried children into streets to watch processions of gods, to sing and dance, to eat from offerings distributed after rituals. These moments joined family life with religion, reinforcing ties between parent, child, and the divine. Marriage connected households. Children were expected to marry in youth, often arranged by families. Girls moved to their husband's home, carrying skills learned from mothers. Sons began new households, but often remained close to parents. Generations overlapped, children growing in the care of both parents and grandparents. In wealthier households, servants supported families. Children of elites were sometimes raised with nurses or attendants. Yet, even here, family bonds remained central. Scenes in tombs show noble fathers teaching sons to read, noble mothers instructing daughters in music or weaving. The patterns of guidance and discipline were the same, though carried out with more resources. Families valued fertility. Many children meant survival, for death claimed them often. In prayers and texts, parents asked gods for numerous offspring, describing them as blessings. The loss of a child was mourned, but the presence of many helped sustain families through grief. Archaeological remains of homes show toys scattered among household objects, weaving tools beside children's dolls, and small footprints pressed into mud brick floors. These traces remind us that family life was lived in shared spaces, with children always near. The house was both workplace and shelter, a place of correction and care. Children in ancient Egypt belonged not only to themselves, but to their households. They carried water, ground grain, learned skills, and obeyed elders. They were loved, disciplined, and prepared for adulthood. The household shaped their world, its routines binding them as tightly as the river's floods bound the land. Linen and shaved heads. Clothing for children in ancient Egypt was simple, shaped by the heat of the desert and the needs of survival. In the earliest years, children often wore nothing at all. Nakedness was common, practical in the warmth of the Nile Valley. Reliefs and statues show boys and girls without clothing, their bodies marked only by jewelry or a single lock of hair left at the side of the head. Childhood was visible in appearance, recognized by these signs rather than garments. As children grew, they wore linen, the fabric of Egypt. Flax was cultivated along the Nile, its fibers spun into thread, woven into cloth, and bleached white in the sun. Linen garments were light and cool, suitable for the climate. Boys wore simple kilts, short and tied at the waist. Girls wore straight dresses, held by straps over the shoulders. These garments were plain, with little decoration. Wealth determined the quality: fine, thin linen for the rich, coarse, rough cloth for the poor. The head carried special meaning. Children's heads were shaved to prevent lice and to keep cool in the heat. Only one lock of hair was left, often braided, hanging on the side or at the back. This was called the side lock of youth. It marked the child clearly in art and in life. Statues of princes, painted tomb reliefs, and small figurines all show this distinctive style. When the child reached puberty, the lock was cut, signifying entry into adulthood. Jewelry added both beauty and protection. Children wore amulets strung on cords around their necks, scarabs carved from stone, images of Bes or Tauret, and eyes of Horus hung close to the body. These charms were believed to guard health, ward off spirits, and protect against accidents. Wealthier children wore gold, silver, or faience beads. Poorer children carried charms carved from bone or clay. Rings, bracelets, and anklets also appeared, their jingling sounds part of daily life. Cosmetics were used by children as well as adults. Kohl, made from ground galena mixed with fat, was painted around the eyes. It reduced glare from the sun, protected against flies, and helped prevent infection. Reliefs show even young children with dark lines circling their eyes. Red ochre sometimes tinted lips or cheeks, though less commonly for the young. These practices blurred the line between ornament and medicine. Footwear was rare. Children, like adults, went barefoot most of the time. The ground beneath them was hard and hot, Yet sandals were expensive. Made of leather or woven papyrus, they were worn mostly by the wealthy or on special occasions. Bare feet hardened quickly, though cuts, sores, and infections were constant risks. Seasonal changes altered clothing little. Even in cooler months, linen remained the primary fabric. In the north, near the delta, where winters were chillier, children might wrap themselves in thicker linen or wool cloaks. But for most of the year, their clothing remained light, simple, and unchanged. Clothing also reflected status. Children of noble families were depicted in finer kilts and dresses, sometimes pleated, sometimes adorned with beads. Servants attended them, adjusting garments, braiding hair, or polishing jewelry. In contrast, children of farmers and workers wore rough cloth, often patched, sometimes torn. Nakedness persisted longer among the poor. While wealth allowed adornment from the earliest years, festivals brought temporary difference. On holy days, children wore garlands of flowers, their hair perfumed with oils. They joined processions dressed more finely, their amulets renewed, their jewelry polished. The scent of lotus flowers and incense marked these rare moments, when appearance was elevated beyond the ordinary. The daily reality, however, remained plain. Clothes were worn until they frayed. Linen grew stiff with sweat, dirt, and salt. Washing required labor, beating cloth against stones in the Nile, scrubbing with clay or natron. Children often wore garments stained and patched, reflecting the strain of work and scarcity. Appearance marked stages of life. The sidelock of youth, the amulet at the neck, the plain linen kilt, or dress all signaled childhood to those who looked. These signs disappeared with puberty. The sidelock was cut, garments lengthened or grew more elaborate. Amulets were replaced by jewelry of adulthood. Childhood was recognized in outward form as much as in labor or duty. The image of Egyptian children survives in reliefs and statues, their shaved heads, narrow kilts, and small amulets preserved in stone. These depictions remind us that appearance was not vanity but identity, a visible language of age, status, and belief. For the children themselves, their clothing and adornments were simply part of daily life, as constant as the sun and the river. Hygiene in the heat. The Nile shaped not only food and work, but also cleanliness. For children in ancient Egypt, hygiene was both necessary and difficult. The heat, the dust, and the insects demanded constant attention. Yet the means to remain clean were limited. What we know of their habits comes from tomb paintings, archaeological remains, and fragments of medical papyri. Together they show a life where washing, grooming, and protection from pests filled as much time as play or rest. Bathing was simple. Families washed in the Nile or in small basins within their homes. Children splashed in the river's shallows, their bodies cooled by its water. Yet the same river that cleaned them carried parasites and disease. Worms entered through the skin, invisible and slow, leaving children weak over time. To bathe was relief, but also risk. Despite this, water was essential, and most children were washed daily. Soap did not exist in its modern form. Instead, Egyptians used a mixture of natron, a naturally occurring salt, and clay. Natron dried the skin, removing oils and dirt. Clay was rubbed onto the body, then rinsed with water. Children were washed this way from infancy, their mothers scrubbing dust and sweat from their skin. For the poor, a simple rinse in the river replaced these mixtures, though the result was the same brief cleanliness, followed by the return of heat and dust. Shaved heads were part of hygiene as well as identity. Children's hair was cut close, leaving only the sidelock of youth. This prevented lice, a constant threat in the crowded homes and schools. Oils were rubbed into the scalp to protect against dryness and insects. Wealthier families used perfumed oils, while poorer ones relied on castor or sesame oil. The shine of oiled skin and hair was both practical and symbolic, reflecting purity as well as care. Cosmetics served hygiene as much as ornament. Kohl, painted around the eyes, reduced glare from the sun, but also protected against infections carried by flies. Flies swarmed constantly around food, waste, and animals. The thick black line of kohl acted as a barrier, reducing inflammation and shielding the sensitive skin around the eyes. Even small children wore it, their faces marked by lines that seemed decorative but were protective first. Clothing required washing, though water was precious. Linen grew stiff with sweat and dirt, so mothers and daughters beat garments against stones in the Nile. Clay and natron were used to scrub stains. Children often wore patched and faded garments, never fully clean. In poorer homes, nakedness avoided the need for constant washing. For wealthier children, servants handled these tasks, but the result was the same linen quickly lost its brightness in the dust and heat. Toilets were rare in ordinary homes. Most children relieved themselves in fields, along the riverbanks, or in simple clay pots emptied daily. Larger houses sometimes had limestone seats over pits, but these were exceptional. Waste filled the environment, attracting flies and spreading disease. For children, exposure was constant. Hygiene meant endurance more than protection. Perfumes and oils masked odors. Even children were rubbed with scented oils on festival days, their skin gleaming under the sunday. Lotus, myrrh, and frankincense were blended for the wealthy, while simpler families used animal fats. The oils softened skin dried by sun and wind. They also served as barriers against insects, though imperfectly. Hands were washed often. Tomb scenes show families eating with hands from shared bowls. Before meals, water was poured over hands, sometimes scented with lotus or herbs. Children learned this practice early, though its effectiveness against disease was limited. Still, the ritual carried weight, connecting hygiene with order and purity. Teeth, however, were rarely cleaned. Bread ground with stone dust wore enamel thin. No toothbrushes or pastes existed. Some chewed sticks to freshen breath, but decay spread quickly. Children suffered from abscesses, infections, and pain that no washing could prevent. Archaeologists have found skulls of children with severe dental disease, proof that hygiene had limits the Nile could not wash away. Insects remained constant. Flies swarmed over faces, bodies, and food. Children waved them away endlessly, their gestures carved into art and remembered in texts. Mosquitoes bred near canals, carrying fever. Fleas and lice spread through bedding and clothing. Oils, shaving, and washing reduced them, but never fully. Cleanliness was always partial, never complete. For children, hygiene meant daily routines of washing, shaving, oiling, and painting eyes. These practices brought some relief, but never removed the risks of parasites, insects, and disease. The heat returned, the dust settled again, and the flies circled without end. Cleanliness was constant labor, fragile against the Nile's hidden dangers. Festivals, in the heat of the Sunday, life for children in ancient Egypt was steady, filled with work, food, and survival. Yet scattered through the year came festivals, moments when the ordinary broke apart. These days did not remove hardship, but they offered color, sound, and brief release. Children were drawn into them, not as spectators alone, but as participants in ritual and celebration. Festivals honored the gods. Each temple kept its own calendar, its own processions, its own rituals. In Thebes, the great Opet festival carried the statue of Amun from Karnak to Luxor. In Memphis, processions honored Ptah. Along the Nile's smaller towns, local deities were brought out from shrines. Priests carried statues on barks, wooden platforms shaped like boats, resting on the shoulders of men. The air filled with chanting, drums, and the ringing of sistrums. Children watched, pressed between families in crowded streets. The heat was heavy, the dust rising beneath countless feet. But the sight of gods leaving temples brought wonder. For many, it was the only time they saw sacred images outside walls closed to common people. The statues, hidden most of the year, appeared shining, draped in linen, crowned with flowers. Children stretched to see them, their eyes wide as divine faces passed above. Food was part of the celebration. Offerings placed before gods, bread, beer, onions, figs, and meat, were later distributed among priests, and sometimes among the people. Families returned home with extra food. For children, these days meant rare taste of sweetness, honey cakes or dates, or roasted goose shared in courtyards. The abundance was temporary but memorable, a brief break from the coarse bread and onions of daily life. Music and dance filled the hours. Women shook sistrums, children clapped hands, and groups moved in rhythm. Girls sometimes performed dances taught by mothers, circling with arms raised. Boys joined in drumming or singing refrains. Reliefs carved into temple walls showed dancers and musicians, their movements frozen in stone. These images reflect what children would have seen and, at times, joined. Festivals also carried ritual roles for children. Some served as attendants in temples, carrying flowers or pouring water. Boys of scribal families recited prayers, their young voices echoing in sacred halls. Girls of priestly households joined in music or wove garlands for processions. Even ordinary children might help decorate shrines with flowers, reeds, or painted cloth. Participation was both duty and honor. The Nile itself played a role in festival life. During the Feast of the Inundation, families gathered to watch the rising waters. Children waded in the shallows, splashing while priests recited hymns to Hapi, the god of the flood. Clay figures, shaped like crocodiles or fish, were thrown into the river, offerings to the power that sustained fields. The joy of water, usually work, became play for a day. Yet festivals also carried weight. They were not only celebrations but affirmations of order, of ma'at. Children learned through them that gods controlled the cycles: flood, harvest, and rebirth. Participation taught obedience as much as joy. The noise and color masked the seriousness beneath, but it remained present in every chant and offering. For the poor, festivals were rare moments of equality. Children from humble homes stood beside those of the wealthy, all watching the same procession, eating from the same offerings. Differences remained, but the shared act of honoring gods joined them briefly. Night brought further spectacle. Torches lit streets, their smoke drifting into the dark. Children stayed awake longer than usual, eyes following flames as processions continued. Songs carried through the night, blending with the steady rhythm of drums. The smell of incense, thick and sweet, hung in the air, clinging to skin and clothing. The next morning returned to routine. Festivals ended, statues returned to temples, food consumed, flowers withered. Children woke to grinding grain, carrying water, and working in fields. The brightness of celebration faded, but memory lingered. For children, these days stood out against the grayness of daily survival, shaping their sense of time and the divine. Festivals gave no freedom from hunger or illness. Yet they offered moments of wonder: the sight of gods in procession, the taste of sweet cakes, the rhythm of drums, and the glow of torches were fragments of joy scattered through years of labor. For children in ancient Egypt, these fragments were as close to delight as most would know. Games in dust and shadow, even within lives shaped by hunger and labor. Children in ancient Egypt found time for games. Archaeological remains, dolls, balls, carved animals, and scratched game boards show that play was part of their world. These games did not erase hardship, but they offered children brief distraction, small moments of laughter in the dust and shadow of their homes. One of the oldest games was Sine. Boards were made of wood, stone, or simply lines scratched into the ground. 30 squares were marked in 3 rows, and pieces were moved according to throws of sticks or knucklebones. Adults played as well, but children learned the game early. To them, it was entertainment. To their elders, it carried meaning, symbolizing the passage of the soul through the afterlife. Even in play, religion shaped the rules. Knucklebones served other games too. Made from the ankle joints of sheep or goats, they were tossed like dice, caught in hands, or stacked in patterns. Poor children carved them roughly. Wealthier families polished them smooth, sometimes inscribed with markings. They rattled against stone floors, their sound part of childhood in villages and palaces alike. Balls were common toys. Some were made of linen rags bound tightly with string, others of papyrus reeds or leather. Children threw them in groups, kicked them across open courtyards, or tossed them high in the air. Tomb paintings show young girls playing catch-in lines, their arms raised gracefully. The balls were small, yet they carried joy into moments when duty paused. Dolls have been found buried with children. Clay figures, wooden carvings, and ivory shapes formed companions for the young. Some dolls had movable limbs joined with cord. Others carried painted hair or strings of beads for decoration. Children held them close, carried them in baskets, or placed them beside their mats at night. In tombs, these same dolls were placed beside small bodies, ensuring play continued in the afterlife. Miniature animals appeared often. Clay hippos, wooden cats, and carved crocodiles were shaped by simple hands. Some were toys, others charms. But to children, the difference blurred. They pushed them across floors, tied strings to pull them, or balanced them on reed mats. The creatures of the Nile, feared and revered, were also companions in play. Spinning tops added movement. Made from clay or wood, they were spun by flicking fingers or twisting cords. They hummed across packed dirt, wobbling before collapsing. Children crowded around them, cheering softly, though laughter never grew loud. Play was gentle, almost restrained, as though joy itself remained cautious. Games of strength filled outdoor hours. Boys wrestled in the sand, imitating the poses of soldiers. Reliefs carved into tombs showed children grappling, their bodies locked in simple contests. These games trained them for future labor and fighting. Girls danced, clapping their hands in rhythm, singing songs passed down from mothers. Dance was play and ritual, movement that blended the ordinary with the sacred. Water brought another kind of game. Children swam in the Nile, balancing on papyrus stalks, splashing each other in shallow pools. They learned to float by holding onto clay pots. Some raced across the water, their limbs moving quickly, their voices carried on the wind. Yet danger lurked beneath crocodiles, hippos, and disease. Play at the river's edge was both delight and risk. Not all games required objects. Riddles, songs, and chants filled evenings. Children recited verses in rhythm, clapping their hands together. They invented contests of memory, repeating lines until someone faltered. Words carried play forward, simple and steady, their patterns echoing in courtyards under the dim glow of oil lamps. The quality of toys reflected class. Children of nobles played with carved ivory animals, painted dolls, and polished game boards. Children of farmers shaped toys from mud, sticks, and reeds. Yet the impulse to play was shared. A ball of papyrus brought as much joy as one of leather. A doll of clay gave comfort equal to one of ivory. Play was never free from interruption. A child tossing a ball might be called to fetch water. A girl cradling a doll might be told to grind grain. Toys lay abandoned in dust when duty returned. Games lasted minutes, sometimes only moments, before work reclaimed the child. Archaeologists uncover these remnants in graves, scattered among beads, amulets, and broken pottery. Each fragment tells of lives where joy existed but remained fragile. Children of ancient Egypt played, but their games were always brief, always shadowed by hunger, labor, and the nearness of death. Songs beneath the reed roofs. Sound shaped the lives of children in ancient Egypt as much as sight or labor. In homes, temples, and streets, music was constant. Children grew with the rhythm of drums, the hum of songs, and the quiet tones of lullabies whispered at night. These sounds carried meaning: comfort, discipline, and devotion. Mothers sang to infants. Lullabies were simple, often little more than repeated words, their rhythm steady as rocking arms. Some fragments survive, written on ostraca. One reads, "Sleep, little one, do not cry, for the gods are near." These words, soft and repetitive, calmed restless children under reed roofs. The voice was the first music, carrying warmth through the silence of night. Work songs filled daylight. Children heard the scraping of grinding stones, accompanied by mothers chanting short phrases to ease the rhythm. In fields, men called out to oxen, their cries turning into chants that children echoed. Songs matched the pace of labor, slow, steady, without ornament. They were not performed for pleasure alone, but for endurance. In temples, music rose with ritual. Sistrums rattled, drums pounded, and flutes sounded during processions. Children watched from crowds, their ears filled with the solemn rhythm. Some, chosen as attendants, learned to shake sistrums or clap hands in ceremony. Music here was not play, but sacred duty, connecting children to gods they could not yet fully understand. Games carried songs of their own. Girls clapped hands in patterns, chanting verses remembered from mothers and sisters. These chants often held lessons, warnings about disobedience, reminders of gods, or fragments of old tales. Boys played with balls while singing short refrains, their voices joining in call and response. Songs marked rhythm, turning games into patterns. Festivals deepened this world of sound. Crowds filled streets, drums echoed against temple walls, and children danced in circles. They heard hymns sung to Amun, Hathor, or Ra, their words blending devotion with celebration. For children, the meaning was less important than the sensation, the vibration of drums in their chest, the chant rising and falling in unison. Flutes and pipes were among the simplest instruments. Made from reeds cut along the Nile, they produced thin, high notes. Boys learned to play them in courtyards, their songs wandering without structure. These simple tunes echoed across mud-brick homes, filling evenings with sound. Harps, larger and rarer, appeared in wealthier households. Their strings were plucked in measured rhythms, sometimes teaching children calm through music as much as words did. The sound of music also carried discipline. Teachers in scribal schools used chants to teach writing. Students recited lines in unison, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of repeated phrases. This chant, dull and constant, trained memory. Children droned together, their words filling classrooms like a slow hymn. Not all music was gentle. Mourning carried its own songs. When a child died, women of the household wailed rhythmically, their cries rising and falling like ritual chant. The sound of mourning echoed through villages, and other children heard it often. Death was common, and the songs of grief became part of their soundscape. Instruments reflected status. Poor children made music with clapping, with sticks struck together, or with reed pipes cut roughly. Wealthy children were given small harps, decorated sistrums, or drums stretched with hide. Yet the purpose was the same: to mark rhythm, to carry voices, to ease labor or soothe sorrow. Children themselves sang spontaneously. They made songs about animals, about work, about each other. These fragments, though never written down, shaped their days. A girl grinding grain might hum quietly. A boy tending geese might call out in sing-song to keep them together. Music was woven into labor as much as into leisure. The desert carried sound differently. At night, in villages along the Nile, the stillness was heavy. Songs traveled far, carried on dry air. A mother's lullaby might drift into neighboring homes. The beat of a drum in a festival echoed beyond walls. For children, the night was filled with these distant sounds, shaping memory as much as touch or sight. Archaeological finds preserve fragments of this musical world: harps found in tombs, sistrums buried with priestesses, flutes carved from reeds all suggest that music was valued as deeply as food or tools. Scenes painted on tomb walls show children clapping, singing, or dancing, their movements tied to rhythm. These images confirm what was ordinary. Sound surrounded the young constantly. For children in ancient Egypt, music was not entertainment alone. It was work, ritual, mourning, and comfort. It marked the hours of grinding, the steps of dance, the prayers of temples, and the silences of night. They grew with it, lived in it, and carried it until death. The lives of children in ancient Egypt have long since faded, their voices silenced, their play and their labor buried in the sands of the Nile. What remains are traces: tiny bones wrapped in linen, dolls shaped from clay, worn game boards scratched into stone. These fragments remind us of lives brief and fragile, shaped by hunger, discipline, and the endless rhythm of the river. Their days were ordinary, yet harsh, carried forward with little comfort beyond song, amulet, and fleeting moments of play. As you rest, let the quiet of their world settle over you: the steady beat of drums in distant festivals, the hum of lullabies, the whisper of reed mats beneath small feet. The past lingers in silence, and its lessons move gently through time. If you wish to hear more stories told in this way, then remain with us. Subscribe and join us again.